Okay, today we're going to look at two more examples, very similar to yesterday. In fact, the setup looks almost exactly the same. What is different, however, is what I mentioned this yesterday, but this is not counting by ones. That's the only difference. Otherwise, we're still talking about the same stuff. And this has been a few days now where we've been talking about a rate of change. And again, I think every day we add little layers onto it, but it's stuff that you can connect to and stuff that you can understand. And I hope that your understanding is building more and more over these each day, and it's making even more sense. We're still going to do this the same way we did it before, but there's going to be one extra thing that we have to think about. I say we dive right into this and get started. I'm going to look right here, and I'm going to see that from 50 to 100 is an increase of 50. Now you might be able to do that in your head, or you might not. If you can't, then you're going to do 100 minus 50, okay, to give you 50, and then 150 minus 100 to see that this is also an increase of 50, and this is also an increase of 50, okay? But that doesn't mean I'm getting $50 per hour here, because this increase of $50 happened in more than 1 hour. So this is an increase of 5 hours. This is an increase of 5 hours. And this is an increase of 5 hours. Okay, I'm going to track this back. That's going up by 50 this way. So going back the other way, I'm going to subtract 50. And 50 minus 50 is 0. And I'm adding 5 this way. So I'm going to track back and subtract 5 that way. And 5 minus 5 is. So I've done the same thing on both sides, figuring out what the change is here. Yesterday we did this as well. We figured out this change, but it was always 1. But in this case, it's different. So let's do the easy one first. How much for 0 hours? That's just from the table, $0. How much for 1 hour? How much per hour is better than for 1 hour? Okay, that's a bit of a dangerous way to say it, but how much per hour is the best way to think about it and the best way to say it. But it's not just $50 per hour. If I look at yesterday's, okay, it worked out that way. How much per hour? It was 10, 10, right? But that's not the case here. You're not making $50 an hour. You're making $50 in 5 hours for each of these, okay? So that's why in this case it's a little bit trickier, and I have to do this division. 50 divided by 5, again, if the numbers are friendly and you can do it in your head, great, but if not, use your calculator. And this is $50 in 5 hours is $10 per hour. Okay, so what is the rule? The earnings in this case are 10 times the number of hours, again, plus 0, but we don't need to write that in this case. So that's the only thing that's changing today, is that the number of hours, let's say, is not growing by 1, it's growing by something else. And again, $50 in 5 hours is the same as $10 in 1 hour, $20 in 2 hours, $30 in 3 hours. Those are the same thing. How much for 20 hours? $200. 10 times 20. I took this and I put it in for the number of hours. It's also in the table. Okay, let's graph this. I'm starting at 0, and in 1 hour, let's see, actually, in 5 hours I'm going 50, but 5 isn't on here. In 10 hours, I'm up to 100. But that's the same as if I'm going over 2 hours, I've got to go up to $20 because it's $10 for 1 hour, which is $20 for 2 hours. Okay, and I'm going to find some points there and get my ruler. And draw my line. Okay, and 20's, oh, 20 is on here. So 20, follow it up, and if my line is correct, follow it over 200. And sometimes on my computer, I have a hard time doing it accurately because I can't move the ruler the same way you can move a ruler on paper. But hopefully you should be able to draw your lines carefully enough that you can read the correct answer off the page. If I had done it wrong, let me just show you an example. If I was off by even a little bit, it might look close when I look down here. But look what happened. Whoops, look what happens when I get up there. It's off by quite a bit. Okay, so I want my line as much as possible to be perfect. And that's how you do it when the number of hours doesn't change. And the problem sometimes we come across is we start to develop bad habits because it's always gone by one here. People cheat and they only look at this number. But now you can't do that. So if you took the 50 and you put it as your answer here, that would have been wrong because it's not $50 in 1 hour like it was yesterday. Hold on, let me let that load. It was $10 for 1 hour yesterday, but now it's $50 for 5 hours. So it's not quite the same thing. Let's take a look at one more example. Okay, same thing, a change of 200 to 300 is up 100. 300 to 400 is up 100. 400 to 500 is up 100. Okay, again, if you can't do that in your head, we've looked at how to do that with calculator. I just do 300 minus 200. So I'm going to track backwards. 200 minus 100 is 100. Now I'm going to check these. This is 10 to 20 is up 10. 20 to 30 is up 10. 30 to 40 is up 10. Track backwards. That's how much for 0. Because that gives me 0 there. We saw examples where what if I went back once and it didn't give me 0? I'd have to go back again, right? How much for 0 hours? Looks like $100. How much per hour? $100 in 10 hours, right? 100 divided by 10 is $10 per hour. Every example in the last 2 days was $10 per hour, and that was not on purpose, but maybe that's useful to look at all these different situations with different numbers in the table, but they all end up being $10 per hour. Okay, but that's not how it's always going to be with all of the questions in the course for sure. What is the rule? So the total amount of earnings is how much you start at plus the change. In this case, I'm increasing by $10 per hour because these were all going up. Okay, and times the number of hours, or E equals 10 times the number of hours plus 100. How much for 20 hours? So I take 20 as my number of hours and put it in for H in my rule. 10 times 20 is 200, plus 100 is 300. And let's see if that matches. What was the start? The start was 100. And in 10 hours, I'm going up 100. So when I go over 10 hours, I'm going to go up 100, which is the same as in 5 hours going up 50. And I can see on this, for 10 hours, I was at 200. For 10 hours, I was at 200. Before I go on, I'm going to remind you one more time. We talked about this kind of every day for the last few days. But after 10 hours, I've made $200. $200 in 10 hours looks like $20 per hour. But why is that wrong? Because it's not. It's $10 per hour. We've already seen that. But it looks like $200 in 10 hours would be $20 per hour. That's because I started at 100. Maybe you're already starting with that amount of money in your bank account. Maybe that's what it is. So I've changed from 100 to 200, which is up 100. And that took me 10 hours from 0 to 10, which is a total, like we saw before, of $10 per hour. So again, looking at it in the graph maybe helps us think about how how the uh, rate of change when I'm starting at a certain amount is kind of hidden in there a little bit, and it's a little bit trickier to figure that out than you might think. Okay, so draw my graph, draw my line again, sorry, and it says how much for 20 hours, and take a look at that. It was $300. So our graph matches and our table matches, and all three match as they should. So what was a little bit different about today was we're looking at the change in the amount of money we earned, but we're also looking at what's the hours changing by. So this one's going up by 10, this one's going up by 5, okay? And yesterday it was always going up by 1, and in the last unit it was always going up by 1, but from now on it won't always go up by 1. And we have to recognize that to find the amount per hour, to find the change, I need to use both of those numbers and get in the habit of that and remember that both of those are changing. Otherwise, everything else is the same, and I hope this is really starting to come together for you. We're looking at where we start, how much for 0, what is the change, how to write a rule with that, how to tie it to a graph, because that's really important, okay? And how to think about what the whole situation represents, and in a real life situation, like your hourly wages for a job, um, and in some cases where you may also have a fixed cost, okay, an upfront cost, something like that, okay?